Contemporary atheism is a continuation of monotheism by other means, hence the unending succession of God surrogates, such as humanity and science, technology and the all-too-human visions of transhumanism. But there is no need for panic or despair. Belief and unbelief are poses the mind adopts in the face of an unimaginable reality. A godless world is as mysterious as one suffused with divinity, and the difference between the two may be less than you think. I'm ahead of the curve, also known as James Bergman, and in today's book review I am discussing John Gray's Seven Types of Atheism, first published in 2018. John Gray is a writer and a proponent of analytical philosophy. He is probably most well known for his book Straw Dogs, which I have reviewed a few weeks ago. That piece is probably too pessimistic for me, I would say, although that isn't to suggest that what he says is incorrect. I think that everything that he says is more or less on point, but the implications that it leaves the reader with are not very positive, not very constructive. And as I say in the end of that review, I kind of wanted him to share his own opinion a bit more at the end. I wanted his own perspective, his own way of seeing the reality that he's just laid out. And whilst we don't necessarily get this with this book either, it's still a beautifully composed and thought out book. What I thought the book was about before I read it was John Gray outlining the different types of atheism. There's agnostic atheism, there is Gnostic theism, and so on and so on. I thought he would be talking about the different types of belief and lack thereof, but actually I was pleasantly surprised to find out that it wasn't particularly that, but the different representations and interpretations that atheism as a lack of belief in God. Gray brings up theists and atheists alike to discuss the topic of atheism and its past and its potential future, in referencing Ayn Rand and Simone de Beauvoir, Friedrich Nietzsche, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Joseph Conrad. He references so many different people in the field of philosophy, and sometimes not even directly related to atheism, like John Stuart Mill or Bentham. But what he does is he looks at the past of these philosophers and what they found, and their different types of atheism. For example, Arthur Schopenhauer was a spiritual atheist in some sense, whereas Nietzsche was more of an active dissident against Christianity, but not necessarily God, more Christianity, as he believed that Christianity was for essentially the weak-willed. First and foremost, John Gray addresses the New Atheism movement, made up from Daniel C. Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and Richard Dawkins. Now, he made it clear in his book Straw Dogs that he wasn't a fan of them, but here he really hammers them home, and he doesn't like them to the extent of not even mentioning them after the first section, just because he kind of had to get it over and done with. I'll read out what he says in page 2 of the book. While atheists may call themselves free thinkers, for many today, atheism is a closed system of thought. That may be its chief attraction. When you explore older atheisms, you find that some of your firmest convictions, secular or religious, are highly questionable. If this prospect disturbs you, what you are looking for may be freedom from thinking. But if you are ready to leave behind the needs and hopes that many atheists have carried over from monotheism, you may find that a burden has been lifted from you. Some older atheisms are oppressive and claustrophobic, like much of atheism at the present time. Others can be refreshing and liberating for anyone who wants a new perspective on the world. Paradoxically, some of the most radical forms of atheism may in the end be not so different from some mystical varieties of religion. I definitely agree with this, because if we think of, Richard Dawkins' militant view of atheism, his dismissal of anything that science can't measure, and not even the open-mindedness to consider that there may be things that the material realm may not include, such as the supernatural, and whether the supernatural is even worth investigating in the first place is debatable. But I think that John Gray makes a solid point when he says that many forms of atheism today are quite dismissive of the philosophy of theology, of religion, and they hand-wave away the arguments as if it's a done and dusted question, whether God exists or which religion is true or false. And John Gray believes religion has far more substance, or at least the capacity to hold more depth than the newer atheists make it out to have. Throughout the book, Gray introduces the atheists of the past, and he reviews their work and what they represented, what they said, and in the following passage, this is outlined quite specifically. Modern atheists can be individuals like Rand, socialists like Karl Marx, liberals like John Stuart Mill, or fascists like Charles Maurras. They can revere altruism as the embodiment of all that is truly human with Auguste Comte, or revile altruists as thoroughly anti-human with Ayn Rand. Without exception, these atheists have been convinced they were promoting the cause of humanity. In every case, the species whose progress they believed they were advancing was a phantom of their imagination. As Gray outlines, there is a common myth that atheism is this just one category and it's only for people who just don't believe in God. But actually, atheism is far more complex and nuanced than that. Atheism can consist of agnostic atheism, which is the knowledge claim that, look, I don't know whether God exists, and it's matched with atheism because it's like, I don't know God exists, but as far as belief is concerned, I don't believe in one, which is my current position, agnostic atheist. I don't know, but based on the evidence available, I don't believe in a God. There's other types of atheism, as I mentioned, and what theists in particular, but also atheists themselves, because they might not necessarily look into the depths and the semantics of the issue, but what they don't necessarily realize is that an atheist doesn't have to be a nihilist. An atheist doesn't have to be a materialist. An atheist doesn't have to be a naturalist. An atheist doesn't have to believe that morality is subjective. Sam Harris, the popular neuroscientist, and obviously part of the new atheist movement with Hitchens and co., he believes in objective morality. He believes that morality can be defined and axiomated from well-being, although I don't think that's a good argument. He still believes that. And so that's what John Gray is outlining here. He's saying atheists shouldn't be lumped into one category. Atheism is a far more complex and flourished idea and concept than people like to believe it actually is. Gray also observes that we believe that we're in a secular age. We believe that, for the most part, people don't believe in God. We have a society that is godless. Gray repudiates this. He rejects this. And he says the following: the belief that we live in a secular age is an illusion. If it means only that the power of the Christian churches has declined in many Western countries, it is a description of fact. But secular thought is mostly composed of a repressed religion. The idea of a secular realm originated in Jesus teaching his disciples to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. It is Jewish and Christian monotheism, not the European Enlightenment, that is the chief source of the practice of toleration. But monotheism also inspired many of the anti-liberal movements of modern times, a mix of Christian notions of redemption with agnostic belief in the salvic power of knowledge has propelled the project of salvation through politics. With the revival of religion in recent times, we may seem to be living in a post-secular era, but since secular thinking was not much more than repressed religion, there never was a secular era. We can also tie this passage back to John Gray's other book, Straw Dogs, as I mentioned before, where he posits that humanity as a concept is an illusion, and it is by definition a Christian, a religious concept. He also noted how progress, the concept of progress, humanity's progress, is too an illusion, how values as a whole are religious axiomatically, and so how we act is contrary to our statement that we are no longer religious in our behaviour or our thoughts. when in actual fact we are doing completely that. Nevertheless, of our claim of atheism, this may sound a lot like Jordan Peterson's words, and Gray wrote before Peterson, and so it really isn't Peterson's words. And also, if you've read Ian McGilchrist's The Masked and His Emissary, which I've also reviewed, he also talks about this very idea that, people like to act as if they believe in religion. They act out values and principles that are inherently religious, yet they are not religious, and they at the same time claim that we are secular, but actually we are very much not. And so some of you may be very pleased to know that, yes, of course, these didn't originate with Jordan Peterson. He merely popularized the ideas. What John Gray also talks about is the conception of Christianity and Paul, and how if the emperor of Constantine didn't adopt Christianity early on, then Christianity probably wouldn't have become as big as it was. And so there's two large factors: Paul, the founder of Christianity, and the emperor of Constantine. In effect, John Gray posits that Christianity came about and became popular merely by chance. Now, he does acknowledge that the resurrection claims and the historicity of Jesus is worth sort of gluing your eyes to, historically speaking, because it was an extraordinary event as far as historical documents portray. But from a practical point of view, John Gray does believe that Christianity did essentially come around by chance. The final point that I want to bring up in the video, one that I was pondering on afterwards, and I even wrote about it in my written review on Goodreads, where I note which books I read, and if you sign up, you can also kind of follow me on there, and you can look at my favourite books and things like that. So if you're interested, yeah, check out my Goodreads, it's in the description. But in my written review, I commented on John Gray's passage, which was essentially questioning whether the examined life is worth living. And it is, of course, referencing Socrates when he said the unexamined life is not worth living. But John Gray points out that perhaps this statement is false. Perhaps this statement is not practical. Because when we look at people like Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, Joseph Conrad, many of these atheistic individuals, or at the very least people who indulge themselves in philosophic pursuits, namely those of truth, and not, for example, Stoicism, because that's a different kind of breed of philosophy that is not predicated on existentialism so much. But what Gray points out, and which made me perhaps convinced, actually, whereas before I wouldn't have been, but now I'm more leaning towards the idea that for humanity, it is arguable, it is debatable that the examined life is a positive thing, because once it is, then more questions arise, and once the philosophy of reality kicks in, once it manifests itself to you, once you see it for the colours it truly is, you start to realise that there are more questions than answers now, right? Now that you've read more, there are far more questions that you want answered, but actually, to me at least, the point of philosophy isn't to have answers, it's to try and find out the right questions to then perhaps find answers too. But, I'm somebody who's interested in the journey, maybe more than the actual destination of where I'm trying to go when it comes to, reading and philosophy and theology. And so at this point in time, I don't know, I feel like on a practical level, not only a personal one, but overall a worldly kind of perspective, if everybody understood philosophy to the extent that Nietzsche did, to the extent that Schopenhauer did, the extent that Dostoevsky did, if they really had his acumen, Dostoevsky's, Nietzsche's, Schopenhauer, etc., if everybody understood philosophy to that degree, would the world be a better place? That is debatable, I think. Very, very debatable, because we would assume as modernity comes closer and closer, as the future becomes now, we realise that, people aren't necessarily getting smarter. They're memorising things rather than understanding them. Because it's easy nowadays to know something, right? You can just Google it. Google the right answer and Google will tell you. But does that mean you understand what you're trying to pursue? Does that mean you understand the context behind the answer, the facts? No. So I think it's very arguable that we've progressed in any sense. And John Gray believes this. He believes that it is highly debatable that we've progressed at all. If anything, we are more or less in the same ontological and philosophical position that we were 2,000 years ago. And progress is simply down to the fact that we've become more acquainted with our reality, with science and so on. Of course, this is not to say that we haven't progressed in the slightest, but in the grand scheme of things, there's a question whether we have progressed and whether it's actually done us any good. I don't know. I have no idea. So maybe the examined life is not worth living. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you like this video, leave a like, it really helps the channel grow, and leave a comment and subscribe if you like the video and you want more book reviews and interviews with writers, philosophers and so on. Yeah, I really like this book. I give it 4 stars on Goodreads because, you know, it's a very digestible book. And yes, I'm also very strict with how I rate books, to be honest with you, because half of a 5-star rating is how I personally felt towards it, but then the other half is like how objectively good the book is. And I feel like what's missing from this book is a bit of John Gray's own perspective. I was wanting his thoughts more. There is a bit of repetition at points. He's kind of overlapping at times, but that doesn't particularly bother me because the interpretations of past atheists and his conclusions about them, academic conclusions rather than his own personal ones, they were very interesting, and I found his style to be very unique. And I must say, you know, John Gray, after this book and Straw Dogs, even though I had an issue with Straw Dogs as well, Gray's style alone is something that I'm really, really liking, and I've even began reading his Black Mass as well, because I've just been so infatuated with his writing style and of course his substance. But yeah, that's all from me today. Let me know what you think of this book if you've checked it out, and if you have any questions about it and you're thinking of getting it, then let me know. Anyway, yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.